Alright, so it's the next morning, and our putty has finished curing, as has the glue. So now it's time to actually clean off our seams. Now for the glue side, there's a couple of different techniques that you can use. I find the easiest way is just to use the edge of a hobby knife, because if you look, let's see, where is it? There, you can see just like the little bead of glue coming out between the two halves. And if you take the edge of your hobby knife, you can kind of scrape it flush, and it flattens out very quickly and very easily. Because the glue itself, the dried glue, is softer than the plastic. You end up with a little bit of plastic shaving on your knife, but not enough to affect the contour of the plastic significantly. So, and after only just a few seconds and a few very quick swipes, you can see I've got a very smooth joint between the two halves. Alternately, if you don't want to use a hobby knife, you can use a little bit of sandpaper, but it takes a lot more time and is a bit messier. For the other side, though, with the putty, you can use the same technique if you want to, but it will take a lot more time. So in that case, what you will need to do is use a little bit of sandpaper. In this case, you'll probably want to use like progressively finer grit paper. So I have some 220 grit sandpaper right here. I'm just going to cut off a little square. And this type of sandpaper, this is wet or dry. So I like to use it wet, because if you use it dry, the grit can clog, and essentially you're not getting any benefit. Not to mention when it's wet, it keeps the dust down. So I usually keep a bucket of water next to me while I'm working. I have it down by my feet right now, so I'm just dipping my sandpaper into a little bit of water. So you can see it's a little wet there. And you just start sanding away. And because I applied the putty nice and thin, it won't take a huge amount of time to sand it smooth. But see, look, that's just putty clogging the grit. So if you just moisten it again, give it a little bit of a rub, it's clean. It's good to go again. So now we'll keep sanding, and it doesn't take a lot to sand it smooth. See, after just 20 seconds or so of sanding, it's already almost flush. So as I believe I said yesterday in the first part of this video, essentially what you're doing is creating a new contour between the two halves. And you're using the sandpaper to smooth it out and blend the two halves together. It works fine. It's a little more time consuming. It takes longer between when you apply the putty to when the putty is cured and you can work with it. But the results work pretty good. I mean, let's see, you can see right there. I mean, that's just with 220 grit sandpaper, and it's pretty smooth just as it is. But if you were to try to paint that right now, you'd probably end up with a little bit of texture. So what you want to do is take some slightly finer sandpaper. This is 400 grit, and smooth it out a little bit more, and in order to blend the contours even better. Now the 400 grit isn't going to take away a lot of putty. It's just going to, like I said, just blend the contours a little bit more. Now it's not enough that you'll be able to see it on camera, but if you were to run your finger along it, you could feel that it's a lot smoother, even after only 10 seconds of wet sanding. There you go. And you can keep going progressively with more and more finer grit. I have a sheet of 600 grit, but I'm not going to bother just for the sake of the video. Now, once you get to this point, if you were to hit this with a can of primer, let's say I usually use Tamiya Surface Primer or Mr. Surfacer. This is the finer grit, which I use for the finishing primer coat, and this is a coarser grit that I use for the first coat. I'll explain more about that when I get to the primer coating. But a single coat of primer, basically, and a light sanding with a really fine grit sandpaper would smooth out this contour, and you'd probably barely even be able to notice that there was ever a joint there in the first place on either side. So essentially, that is the basics of seam filling and cleaning up. Each technique has its advantages. I tend to stick with the glue technique because it's faster and it's easier to work with. It's more consistent. You're less likely because I mean, if you just look at how much area is covered by like remnants of putty, I mean, there's not much left there. But originally, it was about a strip about almost a centimeter wide. And if there were any panel lines or any detail like that, you would have to replace all that detail. Like, for example, let's see. Look, right along the spine here, there's a little panel right behind the cockpit. You probably can't see it, but if I were to have used putty to fill this this seam, there's a good chance that the putty would have gotten into those panel lines, and I would have lost that that detail entirely. So that's the main reason why I tend to use the glue technique, because it's easier to work with, and you're less likely to damage existing surface detail. But when you're working with a part like this, just something round and smooth or flat and smooth, go to it. But you got to make sure that you're careful with the amount of sanding, because you don't want to take out too much. You want to create a smooth, even blending between the two halves. You don't want to, grind away at it for 10 minutes, trying to get that perfect contour, and then look at it later and find that, oh, I've created a concave surface in the plastic. Then all you're going to end up having to do is, apply more putty to smooth it out, or, pretend it's not there and hope nobody notices. But, then you would know, but whatever. So that's the basics of seam filling. Where I'm at with my 262, the seams are all filled. I've got to clean up the one on the bottom of the fuselage here yet. I had to do some touching up on it since doing the rest of it, and then I'll attach the wing, which, as I believe I mentioned, I've already attached the engines, and I've stuffed the intakes and the exhausts with a little bit of tissue paper, and I'll explain a little more about why I did that in the next video when we talk about masking. So do stay tuned for that. I will be getting that hopefully put together within the next 2 to 3 days. Every once in a while I just kind of go on one of these modeling benders and get a whole bunch done in a very short period of time, and I figure I can probably have this thing knocked out and the rest of this series finished within about the next week or 10 days. So yeah, do stay tuned for that. Thank you everyone out there for watching, and happy modeling.